Thank you. Wednesday marks 50 years since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. Events are being held across the country in remembrance of the civil rights icon. You can see the King family here laying a wreath at his grave in Atlanta. Joining me now is Steve Berry. He is the author of the newly released historical novel, The Bishop's Pawn. It is based on the events surrounding Dr. King's assassination. Steve, thank you for being with us. Your book is a work of fiction, but heavily influenced by history. You've said in interviews that you read around 400 different books as research for this novel. So what are your biggest questions surrounding Martin Luther King's life and death?
The number one question about his death is why? Why was he killed? We have no idea 50 years later to the answer to that question, and sadly, we never will have an answer to it. My novel tries to answer that question in a kind of a shocking and provocative way to get people thinking about what happened 50 years ago. I wanted to remind them about it. There's a lot that went on back then that we've forgotten about. And, you know, through a novel form, I was able to bring all of that out. My novels are about 90% to history. I keep them as close to reality as I can, so the reader's going to get a pretty good education about what happened back then.
All right, well, let's play a clip from when CBS News correspondent Michelle Miller interviewed Martin Luther King's 3 children. She asked them how they view their father's assassination. This is what they said.
You believe that James Earl Ray did not kill your father?
Well, based on the evidence that was presented in a civil wrongful death trial by our family in 1999, a jury of 12 people in Memphis determined that there was indeed liability based on different entities that were involved in a conspiracy. So I would say a jury determined that, and I certainly respect the jury system in our country.
And all of you, have you all come to that conclusion? Yes?
Yes.
Now, before we get to your thoughts, I should point out that the 1999 civil suit that Dexter King is talking about was only against one person seeking damages of $100. But let's talk about your research, because it focused heavily on the feud between Martin Luther King Jr. and longtime FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. What was that about?
It was an extensive feud started by Hoover. Hoover had a pathological hatred of Dr. King. He was obsessed with him. He spent 5 years trying to destroy him, basically. He created something called CONINTELPRO, which is the counterintelligence unit of the FBI, which is probably the most corrupt organization ever created by the United States government. Today, people who participated in that, and Hoover himself, would probably end up in jail for what they did. But it was a different time back then. And this feud plays into the novel quite a bit, and the reader's going to get a pretty good education about what happened between King and Hoover, which does factor in. And some of what the children were saying there has some relevance, and I incorporated that into the novel.
So do you believe Earl Ray was the shooter? Do you believe the government may have been involved?
You could make a very good case that Ray may not have been the shooter. I didn't go there in my novel because I wanted to attack this from another angle. So I made Ray the shooter in the novel, but there's a case to be made. There are so many unanswered questions about the assassination. So many things were botched because Hoover made up his mind from the moment it happened that there was only one person involved, and he directed all of his agents to focus on one person and one person only. So the investigation never had a chance of going anywhere. And that's why to this day we still have those questions out there, which made good for me to use from a novel standpoint.
Do you think these questions will ever be answered? Do you think that there are some classified documents that will finally come to light at some point?
No, I think the questions are dead forever. All of the participants are gone. All of the participants are silent. The evidence is long cold. We will never get an answer. And, you know, James Earl Ray spent 29 years of his life, you know, lying, basically. We never got anything out of him that was anything of any great substance. So sadly, we won't have the answer, but there's some interesting speculation, and in the novel allowed me that format to raise that speculation and get the reader thinking.
All right, now there's one more clip from the interview with King's children that I'd like to play for you, this one about his death and legacy.
I have to ask this question of you. Did you have to lose your father for the nation and the world to appreciate him the way they do today?
you look at the greater good in terms of the sacrifice, because if he had lived, he may not have been, I'm certain he would not have been as effective. Because he gave his life, he was martyred, and then you remember all of the positive things he left behind.
If I had to do it all over again, would I want my dad here? I would say no.
No.
Our world is in a better place because our father gave his life. So yes, I worked through, dad here, dad there, having him, to ask the tough questions when I'm going out on a date or something, but, where would our world be?
So is that sentiment, that idea that Martin Luther King had to die, had to give his life for his message to continue, something that you agree with?
Absolutely, as part of the novel. In fact, it's a central core of the novel. It focuses mainly on what he said the night before he died in the mountaintop speech. And if you listen to that speech all the way through and you listen to his words, they're dealing with mortality, his mortality, and they sound just like a man who knows he's about to die. It's kind of spooky when you listen to the whole speech. I heard that speech about 10 years ago, and that's where the idea for this book came. I held the idea to this year to publish the novel now, because I assumed we'd be having this conversation now, and I'm glad we are, and the novel hopefully will be able to take a place in that conversation.
Absolutely. Steve Barry, author of The Bishop's Pawn, thank you.